But the explosion didn't come from outside. It came from the fourth floor mechanical room, and Elena Reyes knew that before the smoke alarm even triggered, because she had been watching that door for 3 days. Nobody else was paid to notice. She was the new maintenance tech, the one Supervisor Grady called the temp, in front of contractors, even though she had signed a permanent contract 6 weeks ago. The one who carried her toolbox through the lobby of Hargrove Medical Center every morning. While the facilities manager, Mr. Dwight Calloway, looked through her like she was part of the wall. That was fine. She had been invisible before. She knew how to work in the dark. Shook. A ceiling tile dropped 3 feet from where Dr. Marcus Holt was standing near the nurse's station on the 3rd floor, and he pressed himself against the wall and gripped his clipboard like it would protect him. 2 administrative assistants screamed. A rolling cart of lunch trays crashed sideways. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then held. Barely. Elena was already moving up the stairwell before the echo faded. Her radio clipped to her belt. She had her kit, and she had 8 years of something that nobody in this building knew about, something she hadn't talked about since she'd driven away from Fort Campbell with 2 duffel bags and a DD-214 and a very specific plan to disappear into ordinary life. She pushed open the 4th floor stairwell door and walked into a wall of black smoke. 3 weeks earlier, Elena had taken the job at Hargrove because it paid $22 an hour and included health insurance, and because the shop foreman at the plant where she'd interviewed had looked at her resume and said, "We don't usually hire women for the floor." She'd smiled, thanked him for his time, and walked back to her truck. Manner spoke. Hargrove Medical Center was a mid-sized regional hospital in Denton, Ohio. The kind of place where everyone had worked together for 15 years and treated any new hire like an uninvited guest at a family reunion. The facilities team had 4 members. Calloway at the top, Mayor spoke. Then 2 men named Briggs and Okafor, who had been there since the Clinton administration, and now Elena, who had been handed a map of the building on her first day and told to figure it out in 2 days. She had the floor plans memorized by day 3, including the mechanical rooms, the electrical risers, the HVAC routing, and every utility access point in the building. Old habit. In a different life, in a different uniform, she had memorized floor plans because lives depended on it. Marman. Calloway noticed her efficiency and decided it was arrogance. "Reyes," he said one morning, leaning against the door of the facilities office while she was logging a work order. "You've been submitting maintenance tickets for things nobody asked you to check. It meant a pressure irregularity in the boiler feed line on 2, she said. If it sits, it becomes a repair that costs about $40,000. I flagged it. On it. I didn't ask you to inspect the boiler." "Come on?" "No, sir." "Say, then don't." She didn't say anything. She had learned a long time ago that some conversations had a ceiling, and arguing above it just cost you energy you'd need later. And Briggs thought it was funny. He told the story at lunch. The new girl trying to show up Calloway. Can you believe it? And the table laughed. Okafor didn't laugh, but he didn't say anything either. He was 3 years from retirement and had made a decision, Elena sensed, to survive those 3 years by keeping his head down. She understood that too. What she didn't understand, and what bothered her in a way she couldn't fully explain, was the mechanical room on 4. Gone up there on day 5 to check the air handler, routine, nothing special. The room smelled right, oil, metal, the faint metallic bite of an HVAC system that needed its filters changed. Spoke. But something in the electrical panel on the east wall was wrong, not visibly wrong, Not wrong in any way she could have written into a ticket without Calloway laughing her out of the room. Just wrong. A faint hum at the wrong frequency. Reich. A conduit that ran to a junction box that had no business being where it was, based on the original blueprints she'd pulled from the city records office on her lunch break. She went back the next day, and the day after that. On day 3, she found the wire. Behind the secondary panel, thin as a guitar string, running down behind a pipe chase, to somewhere she couldn't immediately follow. It wasn't on any schematic she had. It wasn't connected to anything she could identify as part of the hospital's system. Moment. She stood there for a long moment in the humming dark of the mechanical room and felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years. A specific kind of cold, the kind that starts in your sternum and radiates out slowly, the kind your body produces when it is trying to tell your brain that what your eyes are seeing is not a mistake. She took photos. She made notes. She went back downstairs and thought very carefully about who to call. Call Calloway. She tried the hospital's director of operations, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had a corner office on the administrative floor and a reputation for never being available. His assistant took a message. He did not call back. From the hospital security office. The head of security, Officer Randall Penn, listened to her for about 90 seconds before saying, "Ma'am, if you found a loose wire, you can put in a facilities ticket." "A loose wire," she said. "It's an undocumented circuit running from the 4th floor mechanical room through a pipe chase I can't trace on any current schematic." "Come in, Hyde." "Okay," Penn said. He had the careful, polite tone of a man who had decided she was probably a little unwell. "I'll flag it for the facilities team." "Commandant." She knew what that meant. It meant he was going to call Calloway was going to pull her into his office, and this was going to become a conversation about her attitude. She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She pulled up every piece of documentation she could find. Hospital construction records, the original electrical permits, the renovation files from 2019, when the 4th floor had been rebuilt after a water main break. She read until 2 in the morning. The circuit she had found did not exist in any of those documents. Someone had put it there after the fact. Quietly, with enough knowledge of the building systems to hide it well. In a soldier's non, she went back to the mechanical room in the morning with a better flashlight and a longer reach, and she followed the conduit as far as she could before the pipe chase narrowed to something she'd need to open a wall to get through. She took more photos. She tried once more to reach Director Fitch. Manager spoke. His assistant said he was in a board meeting, and could she please submit her concern in writing? And it said she submitted it in writing. That was the morning of day 3. The explosion happened at 11:47 a.m. For me, the smoke on 4 was thick enough that she had to crouch to see anything. She pulled the hem of her shirt up over her nose and moved fast, using her memory of the floor plan because she couldn't see more than 5 feet ahead. The alarm was screaming now, that flat industrial shriek that Pavlovian trained every person in the building to stop thinking and follow the exit signs. No, she didn't follow the exit signs. She reached the mechanical room door and found it blown partially off its upper hinge. The source of the explosion was inside. She could see the charred remains of a secondary panel box, the one fed by the undocumented circuit. The fire suppression system had triggered and was still misting the room in short, cold bursts. That was the only reason there were no open flames. It was destroyed. Whatever had been in it had detonated inward, meaning it was designed to damage the building's systems rather than push outward toward people. That told her something specific. Someone who knew what they were doing had built this to fail infrastructure, not to kill. A warning, maybe, Or a first step, Montured. She did a fast sweep of the room, every corner, every panel, every surface she could reach, without touching anything that might still be live. She was looking for a second device, because in her experience, in a very specific, very particular kind of experience that she had spent 4 years trying not to think about, the second device was the one that mattered. Found it behind the West HVAC unit. It's more sophisticated than the first, professionally assembled. Timed, not triggered by the first blast, which meant whoever built it had accounted for a scenario where the first device was discovered and disarmed before it fired. This one was the backup. This one was designed to go off regardless. For about 4 seconds. She set down her flashlight, opened her kit, and went to work, completely steady. That was the thing about training. Real training, the kind that wires itself into your nervous system over years and repetition and enough real situations that your body stops asking permission from your brain. Her hands didn't shake. Breathing stayed even. Her breathing stayed even. The alarm was still screaming somewhere outside the door, and she didn't hear it. A device. She heard the frequency of its components, the logic of its assembly, the particular signature of how someone had chosen to build a detonation circuit with materials that were individually innocent and collectively deadly. She had seen this signature once before, in a different country, in a different life, in a building that hadn't been evacuated in time. Lamana wishes that building was why she'd left the army. She wasn't leaving this one. In minutes, she knew because she counted, not the seconds, but the steps, each discrete action in a sequence. She had run hundreds of times under conditions considerably worse than this. When the last connection was broken and the circuit went dead, she sat back on her heels and let herself breathe for exactly 3 seconds. Anchor spoke. Then she wrapped the device carefully in the grounding cloth from her kit, placed it in a hard case, and carried it out of the mechanical room. The 4th floor corridor was full of people by then. Facilities, crew who had come up too late, security personnel who were standing at the stairwell entrance and hadn't moved in because nobody had given them a clear directive, and Calloway, who was talking into his radio and looking like a man who was managing the optics of a situation rather than the situation itself. Elena come through the smoke with the case in her hands, and his expression went through several phases in about 2 seconds. Confusion. Then, the particular kind of irritation that happens when someone you've underestimated does something you cannot immediately categorize. "Men, what is that?" he said. "Men. Second device," she said. "Disabled. You need to call ATF and get the bomb squad here to confirm and document. Don't let anyone back into that mechanical room until they clear it." Calloway stared at her. "I mean a second." "A second?" Admitted. "There were 2, she said. "The first one detonated. This is the second. I've rendered it safe, but it needs to be examined by a qualified technician and logged into evidence." "Oh, man." Out toward Penn, who had materialized at Calloway's shoulder. Penn looked at the case, then at her, then back at the case, with the expression of a man who was trying to catch up to events that had moved too fast for his mental model of who Elena Reyes was. "And did you? How did you know how to?" Penn started. She said again. Her voice was patient. She was very tired of repeating herself in this building. "Now, please." A minute spoke. The ATF arrived 40 minutes later. The building had been evacuated, which meant the wide concrete apron in front of Hargrove's main entrance was crowded with patients in gowns, nurses still holding IV bags by hand, administrators in their good shoes, standing on cold pavement, looking confused and displaced. What meant to mean? Elena Soldier's truck sat on the tailgate of a facilities truck at the edge of the parking lot and drank a bottle of water. somebody had handed her. She didn't know who. Her shirt smelled like smoke, and the grounding cloth was in an evidence bag being carried by an agent named Torres, who had shaken her hand with a grip that told her he already understood what she'd done. Omar spoke. He came back to her after 15 minutes with another agent, older, in a jacket that said ATF across the back in yellow letters. Goodness. Mrs. Reyes, the older agent said. His name was Garza. I need to ask you some questions about how you identified and neutralized the device on 4. Come in, she told him. All of it? The initial anomaly, the wire she'd found, the 3 days of trying to get someone to listen, and what she'd found in the mechanical room when the smoke cleared. She told him about the signature of the assembly. Wyatt told her there would be a second device, and what steps she had taken. Garza listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. On a D? He asked. Will you first? Then 18 months of additional EOD training. 3 deployments. She paused. I separated in 2021. Slowly. You reported this 3 days ago. I tried to. I submitted documentation to Director Fitch's office and spoke with Officer Penn. Neither resulted in any action. Garza glanced over at Penn, who was standing near the building entrance, and there was a particular quality to that glance that Elena recognized. It was the look of someone filing something away to address at a more appropriate time. You understand that what you did in that room was. Man? I know, she said. I also understand that the device had a timer I estimated at under 20 minutes from when I found it. There wasn't time to wait for the bomb squad. Her gaze for a moment. Then he said, that assessment was correct. Our technician confirmed the timer setting when he examined your render. Another pause. You saved this building, Ms. Reyes. Potentially dozens of people. She didn't say anything to that. She had learned a long time ago that the moments after something like this weren't the time for talking. A soldier spoke. Calloway didn't speak to her directly for 2 days. She found out later that he had told the facilities team, in her absence, that the whole thing had been a team effort, which was technically the kind of statement that couldn't be proven wrong, since teams were large and abstract. Director Fitch called her into his office on the 3rd day. She sat across from him at a desk that cost more than she made in a month, and watched him choose his words, with the visible effort of a man who had spent his career in administration, and was now in the unfamiliar position of owing something to someone he hadn't properly valued. Miss Reyes, he began. The board has asked me to express our gratitude for your actions during the incident on the 14th. Commission. Thank you, she said. I've been asked by our legal team to review the internal reporting process. Given the timeline of your notifications and our response. I understand. He shifted in his chair. I want to be direct with you. The incident report documents that you attempted to escalate your concerns on 3 separate occasions before the device detonated. That's a significant gap in our protocol. At him steadily. It is. Goddard? There was a long pause. Outside his office window, she could see the parking lot where she'd sat on the tailgate and answered Garza's questions. The concrete was the same color as it always was. Ordinary and flat. Nothing about it looked like the edge of something. Tied. We'd like to offer you a role in our facility safety review committee, Fitch said finally. With compensation commensurate to animation. I already have a role, she said. I'm a maintenance technician. I'd like to keep doing that job. And he blinked. Of course, if that's what you prefer. What I'd prefer, she said. And she kept her voice even, because this was the part that mattered, is that when a member of your facility's staff flags a safety concern in writing, there's a process that guarantees it reaches someone with authority to act. That's what I'd prefer. He wrote something down. She didn't know if it would lead anywhere. She had learned not to put too much weight on what people wrote in rooms like this. But she had said it. She had put it on record. It was what she'd learned to do. In the end, not to wait for the system to see her, but to make sure that when it failed, there was a paper trail long enough to matter. The investigation eventually identified the person who had installed the devices. A soldier. He was a former building contractor who had worked on the 2019 renovation and had a dispute with the hospital over an unpaid invoice that had stretched into a 2-year legal battle. A soldier spoke. He had used his old access credentials, which nobody had thought to revoke, to enter the building twice in the 6 weeks before Elena started. A man spoke. He was arrested at his home in Columbus 9 days after the incident. Elena learned this from Garza, who called her personally to let her know the outcome. She appreciated that it was more than most people would have done. Briggs started saying good morning to her in the parking lot, not in a showy way, just the small, pragmatic acknowledgement of a man who had updated his assessment. Okafor had always been quiet with her, but his quiet changed quality. It became the kind of quiet that meant he trusted her to handle whatever was in front of her without needing to prove it first. Galloway retired early. The timing was described as personal. She didn't spend much time thinking about Calloway. She was busy. The pressure irregularity in the boiler feed line on 2 had gotten worse while everything else was happening. And now it was going to be a repair that cost closer to $60,000. She submitted the estimate. This time, Director Fitch's assistant called her back within the hour. And things change fast. Others take the length of a career, or a lawsuit, or an explosion that nobody died in because someone who had been dismissed as unimportant was paying attention the whole time. Elena Reyes clocked in at 7:15 every morning. She walked the floors in a deliberate pattern, not the one Calloway had mapped out for her, but the one she had designed herself, based on the actual vulnerabilities of the building. She carried her kit, and she kept her radio on, and she noticed things that other people walked past. Immense bake. It was the same thing she had always done, just in a different building. The uniform, Elaine, I keep thinking about that wire. The one Elena found on day 5, thin as a guitar string tucked behind a panel that nobody else had thought to look behind. She didn't find it because she was lucky. She found it because she was paying attention when nobody was asking her to. That's the part that stays with me. In mine. There's a version of this story where Elena reports the anomaly once, gets dismissed and lets it go, where she decides that she's new. She doesn't want trouble. They keep her head down and wait until someone with more authority decides to care. That version of the story ends very differently. It ends with an evacuation that comes too late. I'm in on cold pavement with a building who didn't have to be there, with a building that didn't have to burn. Elena didn't let it go. Not because she was reckless, and not because she needed to be right. She kept pushing because she understood at a level that had been trained into her over years in 2 continents and situations I hope I never find myself in, was that the cost of being ignored was something she wasn't willing to pass on to other people. Charity actually looks like, I think. Not the big dramatic gesture. Not the moment of public vindication. It's the 3 days of documentation, the phone calls that don't get returned, the written report that disappears into a director's inbox. It's doing the right thing in full knowledge that nobody is watching, and nobody is going to thank you for it. Well made. And then there's the room itself. 11 minutes, hand steady, no one else there. What she carried into that mechanical room wasn't just training. It was years of choosing, over and over again, to actually understand the thing in front of her rather than pretend she did. She had pulled those original blueprints from the city records office on her lunch break. In Knighton, she had cross-referenced the renovation permits from 2019. She had gone back 3 days in a row because the first look wasn't enough. Intelligence, real intelligence, isn't about being the smartest person in the building. It's about being willing to keep looking. After most people have already decided they've seen enough. The one I find hardest to hold on to in my own life is what she did after. She sat on that tailgate and drank a bottle of water. She answered Garza's questions. She went back to work. She didn't need Calloway to apologize, or Fitch to make a speech, or anyone to finally see what she was worth. She asked for a process change. She submitted the boiler estimate. She clocked in at 7:15. And recognition spoke. Most of us want the recognition before we're willing to put in the work. Elena had it backwards, and I think that's the only order that actually holds. To Calloway wasn't punishment in any cosmic sense. It was just consequence. The natural result of building a team around your own ego instead of around what the work actually requires. And what happened to Elena wasn't reward. It was just the world catching up to a reality she had already been living quietly for weeks. I don't think we need to believe in anything supernatural to understand that actions have weight, attention has value. Showing up consistently, in the specific way that the moment requires, that accumulates into something. She knew who she was the whole time. She just needed the building to catch fire before anyone else bothered to find out.